I would love to. Well, first this cool.
We'll call this meeting to order. Commissioner DeLong, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yeah.
Allegiance to the flag, of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call. A roll call, please. Yes, thank you.
Chair Henderson,
Present.
Commissioner Corona,
Here.
Commissioner Huboy,
Present.
Vice Chair Belong,
Present.
Commissioner Lenore. And verification of agenda posting was Friday, March 3rd, 2023 at 2:05 p.m.
Okay, there are no minutes to approve, so we will go straight to the public input. This is a time for anyone in the audience to speak on any item not on the agenda and within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. Speaker cards are available in the lobby and are to be completed and given to the secretary before speaking. When the secretary calls your name, please come to the podium, state your name and city for the record, and speak to the City Planning Commission. If you are joining us by Zoom, please click on the bottom of your screen to raise your hand. If you are joining us by Zoom using a cell phone, please press *9. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes with a maximum of 30 minutes per subject. Please note that state law prohibits the Planning Commission from discussing or taking action on any item not on the agenda. Do we have any speakers?
I have no speaker cards. Let me just check the Zoom. I have no hands raised in the Zoom.
Okay, we'll close the public input. We will begin public hearings with item 1, Site and Architectural Review 2022-11. Staff report, please.
Yes, thank you. This item is a site and architecture review 2022-11 for the construction of a 2,400 square foot cannabis dispensary. The property is located at 773 San Felipe Road, which is north of Highway 25 and south of McCloskey Road. The project is located within the North Gateway Commercial Zoning District, and which is allowed for commercial development. And then, as mentioned, this is for a cannabis dispensary, which is an allowed use in the North Gateway zone. The project site is a 3,500 square foot lot, which has direct access to San Felipe. It is in front of a site and shares access through their driveway here to the Felipe 9 project, which is an approved entitlement for cannabis, a separate owner and separate operator, but it's a cannabis greenhouse facility that was approved by the Planning Commission. This building is set back from San Felipe Road, as you can see from the right of way, by 10 feet with some landscaping and buffers, which I'll talk about a little bit later. They are proposing on-site circulation and access from one singular driveway kind of in the center of the site, and they'll be improving kind of the north 2/3 of the site, with the southern part of the site here on your screen. That will be a gravel kind of unimproved parking area. For elevations, this site, the south elevation here at the top left of your screen is the main elevation and faces towards the parking lot. They're proposing a vertical siding in kind of a tan color and then a green metal roof. They're going for a kind of farmhouse themed style. And this area is, while the surrounding area that's located within the city is all designated North Gateway commercial, there's some existing commercial, existing industrial, and there's some existing agricultural uses to the east in the unincorporated county area. So this kind of style is fits in with kind of the agricultural themes and some of the existing development in the surrounding area. Below the south elevation on your screen in the bottom left, this is the side that will face towards San Felipe Road. However, they do have some significant landscaping screening as well, so it won't be too visible from the road, and it provides, you know, kind of the same farmhouse style. It's a relatively small building, so they do have some breakup with this kind of structure across the roof to break up that form. The project Cannabis doesn't have its own parking requirements in our municipal code at this time, but the closest fit for our code is a general retail use for 1 space per every 250 square feet of gross floor area, and plus 1 space per each company vehicle, and with a 5% bicycle parking requirement. This is a 2,400 square foot building, so it requires 10 vehicle parking spaces and 2 bicycle parking spaces. This project, on the only counting the improved area, not that gravel space to the south, is providing 21 vehicle parking spaces, so well in excess of the minimum requirements for general retail at the site, as well as a bicycle parking rack, which will provide those bicycle parking needs. So they meet and exceed our parking requirements. This is the landscaping plan for the site. They are proposing a kind of underground and retention chamber here in this landscaping buffer between San Felipe Road and the parking lot. And they are preserving existing trees along the west San Felipe frontage. And again, screening the parking lot in accordance with our requirements, as well as screening the building and maintaining.
Excuse me, Eva. I'm sorry. Are you using PowerPoint right now?
I am.
Okay, can you use the red pointer, the laser? We can see where you're pointing.
I don't know how to do that.
I think you right click maybe. Pointer, yes. laser
Ah.
pointer. Yeah, thank you.
Learn something new. Thank you. Yes, so here along, this is the west. So this is San Felipe Road, the frontage. North is to the left of the screen here. So they are preserving existing trees as well as planting some additional new trees throughout the parking lot. And this is in accordance with all of our screening requirements. They are proposing deliveries, so they don't have any company vehicles per se, but they will receive deliveries here in the back. There's some access to the side of the east side of this property. So deliveries will be screened, as well as their trash enclosure is here to the east of the building. So screened from the public view from San Felipe Road. They are providing 18% of the site as landscaping, which is well in excess of the 5% minimum landscaping requirement that is required by our municipal code. The project is consistent with our goals, LU1 and LU11, with regard to design and the North Gateway commercial land use designation of our general plan. It's, as mentioned, compatible with the surrounding kind of commercial and industrial, as well as the unincorporated agricultural uses, kind of nodding to barn and kind of the agricultural structures that are in the area. And the project is consistent with all of our bicycle and pedestrian circulation goals of the general plan. They provide ADA accessibility to the right of way, as well as the bicycle parking. And as conditioned, the project is contributing to the San Felipe Precise Land and Beautification Study, which was adopted by the council for improving the project frontage to meet those requirements, which that Precise Line study was an analysis of from Highway 25 all the way to 156 and includes medians more to the north of this site, as well as pedestrian and access trail on both sides, a multi-use path. So that's the San Felipe Precise Line and Beautification Study requirements on the frontage. This project site is less than 5 acres and meets all of the requirements to be deemed categorically exempt from CEQA pursuant to Class 32 for infill development. And the project is consistent with all of our zoning designation requirements for North Gateway, including landscaping, parking, architectural compatibility, and the use is permitted within the zone. And with regard to the use, the project is conditioned to receive any required cannabis-related permits, including a regulatory permit for the operation of the site prior to issuance of a business license for cannabis use. The City Council has previously approved a cannabis use permit as well as a development agreement for cannabis use at this site. So the only thing that would be required of the applicant at this time would be a regulatory permit, which is a council approval. The city did receive a request, a letter that's available to the Planning Commission, and that was forwarded to them for amendments to condition of approval 89. Condition 89 is with regard to those frontage improvements required for the project along San Felipe Road. The condition as written in the draft staff report and draft resolution requires the applicant to dedicate and improve their frontage improvements, or if the city engineer deems appropriate, allows for the applicant to pay improvement costs in lieu, which would be collected and set aside until the city improves the frontage as part of some sort of larger improvement project. Planning and engineering staff, myself, Director Hopper, and Christian Bulis, our associate engineer, met with the applicant last week on March 1st to discuss the concerns with this condition. The applicant is requesting the option to enter into a deferred improvement agreement rather than improve or pay in lieu for those frontage improvements as the condition is currently written. And I'll have Christian speak to this condition a little bit more if he's willing to do so, but staff is recommending the Planning Commission maintain the condition as written with the standard language. I don't know, Christian, if you wanted to speak to the condition slightly.
Good evening, Christian Bulis, Associate Engineer. So the condition of approval 89 requires the developer to do frontage improvements, which is a common practice for the city. Regardless of the use, the city requires the projects to provide the dedication and also do the improvements. In this case, since the project has the frontage with San Felipe Road, it is ideal for the council and for the Planning Commission to move forward with either allowing the developer to do the frontage improvements or pay in lieu. As Eva had mentioned, there is a plan line that was approved for the San Felipe beautification, which essentially will improve everything going north of Highway 25, as far as sidewalks, pedestrian access, buffer for bike lanes, and so on. So in this case, in conversations with the city engineer, we will see that for the developer is, the idea is for the developer to leave the condition the way that it is, and for the city to allow the developer to pay in lieu so that the money could be put aside, so that when we do have another project moving forward, we could actually do the improvements. The other reason the city feels that is important for them to keep the condition the way that it reads is that we have seen that with deferred improvements, there's times where like the improvements will never get done. We have come across projects that have a deferred improvement that dates the early 80s. And so that's an issue because time goes by and nothing gets done. So the main reason is that we want to make sure that this gets done and that we do have the money put aside when the project moves forward. There's one last thing that I wanted to mention is that when the city has projects that are this large, it requires a lot of grants that are given by the state or at federal level as well. And I will say 80% of the time they require that the city provides a matching funding. So if we don't have the money to do that, then we're losing the opportunity to get a grant from the state as well.
I have a question. So the applicant's letter today, or the comments seem to indicate there's a conflict between the two projects. So there's another project that's to the east of this that has is going to share the same frontage road, and the applicant is claiming there's a conflict because there was a resolution passed with the previous project that said that that it was going to be a deferred improvement plan. So what is your take on that?
So my understanding is that when the project, and I believe it's Felipe 9, came before the commission last year, the condition was the same as this condition for them to do the improvements or pay in lieu of the improvements. But at that time, and I was not part of that meeting, the commission decided to change the condition and allow them to enter into a deferred improvement, which was not the direction or the recommendation of city staff at the time.
Chris, when you, and the applicant elects to go through a deferred approval process, there's no time limit on that in the past?
Unfortunately, the ones that I have seen, and I'll have to go back to the city engineer, there is no time because there's no way for us to determine how soon we will have all the money to do the improvements. So a lot of times what happens is that if you do have a larger project, you could execute a deferred improvement agreement with the developer, but it could take 5 years or it could take 10 years for the city to say, hey, this is time for you to do the improvements. A lot of times what happens is that the ownership will change. So it's not the same owner. And then that becomes an issue because at that time, all the entitlements are given to the property owner and there's nothing that the city has to say, you need to do the improvements besides that agreement. But that's not a guarantee for the city because there's times where if the developer doesn't have the money to do the improvements, there's nothing else we could do.
So, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. Mhm. I'm good.
So just for clarification, we are asking them to do the curb gutter sidewalk from McCloskey to North Chapel?
No,
Oh,
So
just the road, just the frontage.
use their frontage, correct?
But the project was pointing out that it would comply with desampling the gateway stuff from McCloskey to North Chapel. Is that what do you?
So in this case, they will have to improve their frontage based on the plan line that was approved. But it would only be on their frontage improvements. So it will not go past their beyond what is on their property line.
Well, because I'm reading here for Felipe 9. The deferred improvement agreement is calling out all of those improvements north to the McCloskey Road to the north to Chapel Road. So that was already spelled out on the Felipe 9. Because it says from McCloskey to North Chapel. Not just saying property frontage.
I will have to see what the condition reads for the Felipe 9, but my understanding is that it's only for their frontage improvements.
Okay. So that's just what I'm reading that Gary was quoting.
That could be correct, Commissioner. Apologies for interrupting. That could be correct because the direction and request from the applicant for Felipe 9 was to have the conditions that were placed on the original project approval which was in 2018. So it's just whatever language was from that condition was replaced with the draft condition. And that might have been a condition from 2018. I don't recall, but I do have it somewhere that I can pull up.
Still about the condition, right?
Yes, so what had happened was the Felipe 9 project had expired and it came back through the Planning Commission for a new approval. And the draft condition of approval had read similar to the language of this draft for this project. And then the request of the applicant was to have the original language, which did mention a deferred improvement agreement at the discretion of the city engineer. And that was what the condition was adopted. I don't see it in here, Erica. We'll see if we can get it pulled up.
I just wanted to clarify, we're asking this project and we asked. Well, you've asked a little more from San Felipe 9, but we're asking this project to be responsible for their frontage.
Correct.
It's their frontage.
That's
Correct.
And a deferred improvement agreement, so what does trigger that? I mean, you're approving of the road and then they do their part. I mean, when does it ever get triggered in a development improvement agreement? I know
So-
you already asked that, but I don't quite get that.
So what triggers the developer to move forward once they enter into the deferred improvement is whenever the city is ready to do the improvements, or if, let's say, for
The
instance,
city wants it done.
correct.
They're not doing it. They're saying do it now. They're telling the property owners to do it now.
To either do it now, or if
No,
the,
but I mean, if you do a deferred improvement agreement, the city still has control over when it gets done,
correct.
so why aren't we getting them done? Thank you. Seems clear that you call on the deferred improvement agreement. You know, I don't, but you have a point with the property changing hands, so I hear that too. All right, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, there's gonna be more questions. Is there any, do you have any questions? Okay. All right, so the Felipe 9 project, that's the one that's to the east of this, correct?
Correct, it's behind
The
this
one
property.
that the letter was referring to. So the improvements that were supposed to, the improvements to San Felipe Road that were supposed to be for the Felipe 9, was that going to be for the entire frontage, or was it going to be just that little narrow strip of driveway that's would be the access?
The intent for the Felipe 9 was to do their frontage, so it will be their access to the side. You can condition a project to do improvements on someone else's property unless it's within the city right away. In this case, because of the San Felipe plan line, it requires them to do the improvements within the city right away, but it's partially within their project as well.
Okay, so I'm still not clear. So was for Felipe 9, was the improvements for San Felipe Road supposed to be for just the length that the driveway is?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Got it. I think I'm clear now. And what about overhead power lines? I drove by there earlier. I don't know if it's power lines, but I think it's some kind of telephone.
Yes, so there is overhead utilities that are required to be underground as well.
That's good.
Okay. And that's one thing that was left out of
That's
the
always good.
the letter or so the 89B, the proposed, the proposal made by the applicant for 89B, it doesn't mention overhead at all. So that's another question
Oh, it's probably a different condition.
We do have a standard condition that
Yeah.
requires them to do underground utilities if there's overhead existing.
okay.
Right.
But this 89B leaves that out. There's nothing mentioned about it.
It doesn't cover that.
Yeah.
That's the other standard condition.
So that's not your problem, but
Lot of
I'm just
conditions.
pointing that out.
A lot of
Yeah.
conditions.
Correct.
I'm sure Mr. Coates might have a comment on that. So is there any other questions for?
One more quick.
Yeah.
So the police department, yeah, they're kind of like the dispensaries to have an open look, like the one on Shelton. They didn't have any concern with it being all treed in. I know it has to be the San Felipe, that's a special requirement there to maintain the foliage, but you're really tucking it back in there where they can't see, I think. But if the police weren't concerned
Yeah, I don't
with
believe
that, then nobody
that was a
had any
concern.
comment. I mean, I know they reviewed it and I'm sure they've commented on it, but they were okay with it being so shielded from the street.
The only comments from the police department were with regard to the safety plan, which then they received in our most recent submittal, which is what's before the planning commission. And then they had commented on an earlier rendition of the coloring, which was proposed to be red. And the police department, which was a similar comment to this project, the original project approval, which has since expired, which is why this one's before you, where the police department did not want it to be red.
Right, good. Hey, what about the hardwire to the PD for the video? Same setup as the other dispensary? Maybe I should be asking the applicant, but you probably know that.
I'm assuming
It's
correct.
okay. All right. Thank you. That's all, Chairman,
Thank you.
for me.
I have more.
Again,
I have another one. Sorry. So regarding overhead, undergrounding of overhead utilities. So utilities go, all the way down that road, or just, before and after this project. So if you're asking an applicant to comply with the, undergrounding of utilities, so do the utilities just go underground just for that one little section and they continue to go up again? I just
So in
wondering
this
how that
case,
works.
the reason, that's one of the reasons why we are going forward with the in lieu instead of having the developer do the improvements, is because a lot of times in order for you to underground one of the poles, you have to underground several ones within the same, because you can't just go up, down and come back up. So that's one of the reasons why we will move forward with the in lieu fee.
For the undergrounding.
Correct.
Any other
Mr. Chair,
questions?
yes,
Go
I
for
do
it.
have a question. I'm a little confused about the stormwater. The staff report says retention facilities are proposed underground. Did you even in your staff report mention underground storage chamber? Because I'm looking at the civil plan. It shows a bioswale to release to roadside swells. That's more like stormwater detention rather than retention.
I'm not a stormwater expert. I could have said something wrong. They're supposed to be undergrounded, but I don't know if it's deep enough to have caused a concern with the stormwater for the engineering department.
So they do have the underground chambers, and they also have the bio swell, which is more for like a sediment control. The way
Okay,
that
I
it
just-
works is that they do have an overflow system, so if they do exceed the 100-year event, they don't have the capacity to keep everything underground. In that case, it will go over to the overflow system.
So there is a chamber there, but I don't see it on the civil plan.
Correct.
You're saying that, okay. I'm just not seeing it there. So there is, in combination with the underground chamber storage, we have a bioswale as
Correct.
part of the stormwater system.
And that's my understanding as when the applicant provided the improvement plans, or since this is coming back to the commission for approval, they may have some revisions to the civils. So I'm assuming that they may maintain the same system, but we don't know until they resubmit to the city.
So my suggestion is that they update the civil plan to show the underground storage per staff report. Unless I'm missing something here. I don't think so, though. Thank you.
Any other questions? Staff?
So I just have the one final slide, which is the options which are listed in the staff report. Staff's recommendation is option one, which is to adopt a resolution approving SNA 2022-11, subject to the draft conditions of approval. You could also adopt a resolution with conditions of approval as modified by the Planning Commission. You could deny the proposed project, or if there was something that you would like additional information on or clarification, we could continue the hearing and come back with any additional information that you request. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. We will now move on to the public comment section at 6:28. Are there any speakers?
I do have a speaker card for Gary Coates.
Excuse me 1 minute. So he's the project proponent or the representative. We supposed to run the clock on him for 3 minutes? I never liked that. I don't know. He's the applicant.
How do you really feel?
Well, I sometimes want to hear a little more from the applicant than 3 minutes. That's how I
I'll
feel.
defer to the city attorney.
It's been the planning commission's practice to just allow the applicants the same amount of time as any other public speaker. That is something you could consider changing in the future. I'd recommend you doing it as kind of more of a formal policy. And in some past meetings, the chair has allowed public comment from an individual speaker for longer than 3 minutes.
Okay,
But
okay.
if you do that, you'll have to allow that same allotted amount of
Yeah.
time to everybody.
It needs to be in conformity. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you. That's fine. I didn't like it on the council either.
Does that count as my 3 minutes? No. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Gary Coates here on behalf of the AMBAM project. Also in the audience, we have Bob and Lana, the owners of the AMBAM project as well. Should we need any of those questions deferred to them and answered. First of all, thank you to staff for taking the time to sit down with us and attempt to resolve some of the issues. And I think we have at least a much better understanding, and I appreciated that opportunity from the commission at our last meeting. With respect to the deferred improvement agreement, because that's really the only thing that I'll answer questions as the commission may have on other things. But the deferred improvement agreement is basically for a couple different things. One, as was mentioned previously, the adjacent project, the Felipe 9, has a deferred improvement agreement. That deferred improvement agreement can be called at any time the city so desires. We don't control the timing of that calling. That is completely by the city. To state that the title future owners don't have that is incorrect. The deferred improvement runs with the land. And as running with the land in this situation, it's recorded as a document with the land. Therefore, it will go to the following people. So you will never lose that opportunity. Our position is not about not putting the development or the improvements in, it's the timing of putting them in. And we just want that timing to be consistent with other actions and with adjacent areas around it. The Felipe 9, in their project of deferred, they had a requirement to look at assisting in the design of the elements from McCloskey, from 125 up to McCloskey. The improvements were strictly their frontage improvements. Same as here. We did not include the overheads because we need to do those. And as to doing them offsite through the whole way, no, we're not required to do that by PG&E. We can drop it at one pole, take it across, pull it up another pole, and that's done. So we don't need to do that. That's already in the cost. We've already analyzed that. But these improvements along with that, they're in excess of $300,000 just for a 2,400 square foot building. And that type of a burden without the joining of all the other deferred or the other adjacent properties of an improvement district or an improvement area makes this very, very costly process and could jeopardize its existence, quite frankly. The other thing is collecting the fees. I mean, that's a fine process. It's good. The city can collect it. It's the same thing with the deferred improvement agreement. It's like you have the fees. You can call those, and the applicant has to pay for those fees, or the owner, excuse me, of the property at that time has to pay those fees. They can be put on taxes. There's various different ways to be paid those fees to make them available for use of the improvements. So that can be done. With respect to the grant programs, oops.
You may continue.
I'll try to make it as
For
brief
two-
as I can.
Yeah,
but-
2 minutes.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. With respect to the grant program, improvement agreements that are actually approved and on record with the city count the same as cash. So you do not leave you lose your in-kind service contribution. So that does not occur in that kind of a situation. So from our perspective, what we're trying to do is say, we're not opposed to the improvements. We're not opposed to those going in. Just let us do those consistent with the other properties around us, and the approval of the Felipe 9 project was deferred, and it was a larger project. So if we have it deferred and a year down the road, 2 years down the road, you want to call it, you have the right to call it. To put us in a position where we say there's some 1980s that we haven't called or whatever, I can't control that. That's not us. That's the city's responsibility. And you have the ability to call those if you wish to do so. So that's our request of the commission. All the other conditions, we have no problem. 135 conditions, we've agreed with all of those. 134 and a half. We just would like number 2 on your list, which is the adopt a resolution with the amendment of that condition of B, which would allow us to put the deferred improvement agreement. So that would conclude my presentation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Coates?
Mr. Chair, I have a question. So, Gary, then, in terms of the timing, you said you had a concern of the timing of the offsite improvements with the rest of the project. What would be, in your view, a good time period for those offsite improvements to be completed?
I think it would depend upon 2 things. One, the city has a plan line study done, but they have not completed the actual construction drawing, improvement drawings. That's probably going to take a good year to a year and a half. I'm guessing Christian would know better than I. Just my experience, that would be taking that amount of time. So I would say probably a year and a half to 2 years, it might be called. And it would also depend upon the adjacent properties. If you had other ones coming in and an improvement district was out there, which is the process that actually, in my opinion, should be followed.
Is it possible to condition the deferred improvements to be completed at a certain date? Depending on the completion of that plan that you're referring to?
What I would suggest is you have that option. You don't need that condition. You have the option to call it at any time that deferred improvement is recorded. You can call that agreement. So if it's a year and a half, if there's a delay or there's some other things that occur and it's 3 years down the road, you don't have to go back and adjust conditions. You still have the right to call it in 3 years. It's totally in the city's control.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Do you have, so you don't have an issue with undergrounding the overhead utilities?
No, we specifically left that off of that deferred improvement because we know we have to for two reasons. One, the fire engine won't fit underneath the lines that are out there to bring it on site. And secondly, is that we have to drop it down because it's a requirement for for that kind of an improvement in that area. We need to do it. So and it's not on the Felipe 9 either. Both require the same thing.
Okay, and would you actually be doing that work and not PG&E?
Oh, we have
Or
to do it with PG&E.
You do it with them?
We
You
don't
work with them?
Yeah, you
Okay.
have to work with them.
I see. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions for Mr. Coates? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other speakers? Oh, sorry.
Don't have any other speaker cards, and I do not have any hands raised.
Okay, thanks. We'll close the public comment at 6:36.
Please. I want this to be given some thought. Walkability, it's the way now. We should really try hard to get that done. And I gotta tell you, that's a direct route to all the county social services and the homeless shelter. It's got pedestrian traffic there, if ever there was any. If this was somewhere where maybe it wasn't that so used by pedestrians, I would maybe not have such a hard time saying, I really want a sidewalk there. And I want it sooner than later. So that's my comment. I think you have a lot of pedestrians there because they're going out to the county. Homeless people don't have cars either. They walk. Thank you.
So may I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So is there an option that you're proposing that you think would make it happen sooner or later, or?
Yeah, option 2. Let's do it now and no deferred improvement agreement, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. So that's my comments.
I share.
I could be
Mr.
reasonable.
Mr. Chair, I do have a concern about deferred improvement agreements when nothing gets done. It needs to get done. And that's the bottom line. Period.
Okay, thank you. So the applicant made a comment that under the deferred improvement agreement that the city can call the work to be done at any time. Is that a true statement? It's a question for staff.
Yes, that is my understanding of the deferred improvement, but I don't exactly know how they work. I might defer, if you'll excuse the pun, to Christian.
Through the chair, as Christian's coming up, it really depends upon how that agreement is written.
Correct.
And then Christian can go on. There's all sorts of things that the city can do with a deferred improvement agreement. However, I think a lot of it has to do more with having the funds available. And Christian can talk a little bit more about that.
Correct. So as far as when you call for the deferred improvement, you could state that within the agreement. You could put a timeline, 24 months from the day of the execution of the agreement. The city deems necessary, they could call for the improvements. However, the point that I was trying to make is that I understand and I know that the agreement runs with the land, not with the property owners. So if it changes property owners, the new property owner will still have the same requirement. However, we will not have anything that we could force that person to do the improvements because we don't know their financial circumstances. So if the city in 24 months says we want to do the improvements, but the new property owner is running his business and for some reason doesn't have the funds to do that, then I don't see how the city could actually force that person to do the improvements.
Well, what if you have one that you ask them to do it and they don't do it under the current owner? What's your recourse there?
What was that again?
What happens if the owner here, this owner doesn't want to do it when you call for it?
I will
what happens
refer
there?
that to legal. I'm
What's
not
the
sure.
legal process?
Well, I mean, these agreements are just like any agreement between any two parties where they're enforced sometimes through the court. You know,
Okay, so
essentially the
let's say
city's,
they didn't have the money and they couldn't do it and we're calling for it. Then there's an issue.
the city sues. I mean,
Okay.
that's like the bottom line.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions for Christian since he's still standing there? Okay.
So just to summarize what your statements, Christopher, you're saying that it is the discretion of this body to condition the deferred improvements to have this work done, let's say in 24 months.
If we were to do a deferred improvement,
Yes.
that wouldn't be my call. That will be something that we will have to determine as soon as we find out when the plans are ready, because right now what we have are the plant line for the San Felipe beautification, so we don't have the construction drawings. So it could take more than 24 months. I honestly don't have an answer for that because this is such a huge project. That when the plans are drawn, it's not gonna be just a small section. We're gonna make sure that everything gets done at once.
When do you anticipate these construction drawings to be completed?
I do not have an answer for that. I'll have to get back to you. I don't have an exact date of when those plans will be approved. It all comes down to funding as well, so we'll have to see how soon we could have those plans ready.
What is the title of is this the beautification project?
Correct. This is the San Felipe beautification,
San Felipe beautification project.
similar to what we have on the West Gateway, which is the West Gateway beautification.
With the roundabout?
Correct.
Mhm. Okay.
Mary did all that. Remember? Mary Paxton? She worked on that.
How could I forget Mary
Gateway.
Paxton?
Yeah. She worked a lot on that special plan
I
there
know.
coming in
She
from,
was fantastic.
yeah.
Yes, she was. Okay. Any questions?
All right, any further discussion or anyone have a motion?
Okay, what do you guys want to do?
I'll go ahead and take a stab at this. What's the PC resolution number, Eva?
The resolution number will be PC Resolution 2023-7.
2023-7. I'll make a motion to approve PC Resolution 2023-7 adopts site and architectural review 2022-11 in regards to as a condition 89. I would like to I'll go along with the revision by the applicant, but I want to have a condition on that the work would need to commence within a certain period of after the street beautification, San Felipe beautification plans are completed. Probably, I would say 12 months.
Okay, any questions about the motion?
I do have one.
Go ahead.
Do we need to add the underground of the wiring since we're changing from A to B, or are we still? Because we're pretty much amending 89A, going with now 89B. Do we
So
need-
Yeah, maybe so you can ask Mr. or Commissioner Huboy to clarify the motion if it's not clear.
Luke, what was that again?
89B doesn't have the undergrounding of existing overhead utilities. That was listed in 89A.
Oh, I want that, that would be, I want that included in the motion, yes,
Okay.
about undergrounding the utilities, right? So actually, it's 89C is my version of this
Correct.
condition 89.
Okay, any other questions about the motion? You're welcome. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Through the chair, can I get clarification on the exact wording of the motion, please? So what I understand is that it would be, the motion is to adopt the resolution that would be two, with the applicant's 89B, including the undergrounding of utilities that was previously included in A. And that the work would need to commence within a 12-month period of the completion of the San Felipe beautification, the construction documents.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Any further discussion about the motion?
I just want to point out that I second it because I'm pro-business for the city of Hollister, but I'm also pro-city. So I'll be looking forward to that improvements as soon as possible.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Let's have roll call vote.
Commissioner Huboy,
Yes,
Chair Henderson,
Yes,
let's see. Commissioner Corona,
Yes.
Vice Chair Belong,
Aye.
Commissioner Lenore.
Aye.
motion passes 5-0.
Thank you for coming, Hollister. I always like to say that. I appreciate it.
congratulations.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I see it here.
Okay, we will now move on to new business.
I have no new business.
We move on to old business.
I have no old business.
We will begin study session items, starting with item 1, zoning ordinance overhaul.
This will be Erica Fraser.
Good evening. This is a second discussion of plan developments with the Planning Commission. On February 9th, we brought the item, we brought a discussion of plan developments to a study session. And during that meeting, staff asked several questions, trying to get a feel for the direction that we should move forward when rewriting the plan development section of the zoning ordinance. And at that meeting, the Planning Commission determined that a conditional use permit is not really appropriate for plan development requests. A rezone is probably a better way to approve these types of requests. The city should allow for flexibility in allowed uses, and that a plan development should be allowed for both residential and commercial sites. At that meeting, you provided staff with direction, but you also had a number of questions for staff and some direction for us. And so we felt that it'd be more appropriate to come back and ask more questions from you before we start drafting. So again, we have some background information, hopefully trying to answer some of the questions that you had at the last meeting. And then we have questions for you again, so you can provide us with more direction so that we can then hopefully begin starting to write this new section of the zoning ordinance.
Okay. Oh, before you begin, in the staff report, I saw 7 questions during the report. And 2 of them were numbered 6. And then at the end of the report, there was only 6 questions at the end. So I just want to make sure you cover all of them.
I don't know. Let's make sure we hit all of them though. Okay, I'll make sure at the end. So plan developments currently are in section 17.24.240. And at the last meeting, what staff had discussed is that this section really needs to be, this section in particular needs to be completely rewritten. The existing regulations in the plan development section of the code are confusing. They are vague in some areas. They are conflicting in others. And technically, plan developments are only allowed for very specific projects. And then this particular section of the zoning ordinance then conflicts with other sections of the zoning ordinance. So at a minimum, all those things have to be fixed. And in doing so, we will be completely rewriting it, which is part of the zoning ordinance overhaul that we are undertaking. At the last planning commission meeting or just study session discussion, there was a particular question on what is a plan development. And so just going back over it again, a plan development is really a flexible zoning device that allows a city or an applicant to redefine the land uses or development standards that would be applied to their property if the strict requirements of the zoning ordinance are applied to that property. So for example, if you have a property that is zoned R1, if you are going to develop your property under the R1, you are required to follow the development standards that the R1 district has. A plan development is a zoning tool that allows for flexibility from the otherwise rigid zoning ordinance. And the reason that that flexibility is allowed is because a city wants to encourage, in most cases, a creative design. In some cases, it might be to encourage affordable housing on the property, or there could be another amenity that that project is providing that the city is willing to relax the standards that we have in the zoning ordinance. Oops, wrong button. So.
On redefine the land use.
Mhm.
I want to be clear on what that means. We're not talking about changing the land use, right?
No, so what, and I'll get into more detail, but what it could mean is that a change in the uses, so we discussed that the last one, a plan development might want to allow for a use that's not in our zoning ordinance. Maybe it's a new kind of unique use. Maybe it's just a unique use that we've never thought of before. And rather than amending the entire zoning ordinance, a plan development could apply it to their property. An example that I have in the staff report is within the M1, like a vehicle auction yard is not even a permitted or a conditionally permitted use. It's not even discussed, but that could be appropriate in the M1. You need a lot of land, you need areas to store cars, whatever they need in that. And so if a vehicle auction yard came to us and said, we'd like to, have this use, we'd like to apply for a plan development, it gives the city the chance to, under that plan development umbrella, really look at what they're proposing. You're proposing a use. Okay, how are you going to configure this site? How are you going to screen the cars? And in that, you're looking at the whole entirety of the project, and you might say, you know what? Interesting use, sales tax dollars. They really designed this very well. We think this is appropriate in that sort of case. So that's where the use would come in. Another type of one we discussed the last meeting was you have a single family residential development, and let's say they're zoned R1, but they'd like to have a nice little neighborhood market. That's technically not allowed in our zoning ordinance, but we're giving them some flexibility in those uses that they can put in there. They're still mainly R1, let's say, but now they get to add a nice little market or maybe a little neighborhood restaurant for their development.
So that would be a peripheral use that is prohibited, but It's not a change of the main use.
No, so once drafted, and it'll be more clear once it's drafted, because you're to see, but what the plan development would allow is, it still has to be consistent with the general plan. So for example, if you are zoned light industrial and you come to us and say, we'd like a plan development to put single family detached houses, you do not conform to that basic general plan designation that you have, which would be light industrial. So that wouldn't be allowed. There are other things that we'll have to make clear, such as the density matches the density in the general plan. So things of that nature will be restricted, let's say.
And if the applicant is interested in proposing residential use in a manufactured zone, then that would be a general plan amendment.
That would be a general plan amendment, and then most likely a rezone, and then you run into other issues with something of that nature that obviously then you have residential uses maybe surrounded by industrial. So again, that's not something that this would be allowed for. And it will be much more clear, once we've drafted the ordinance. We just aren't there yet because we'd like some more direction from you.
Thank you.
So some of the typical requests that plan developments are approved for are a change in the required setback. So maybe they want the front yard setback reduced to allow for porches or to bring houses closer to the street, to kind of activate the street more. A minimum lot size. So the code requires that the lot be a certain size, and they might want to have it reduced. Maybe they want to have, small lot houses. Increase the lot coverage, a reduction in the open space requirements for the multifamily type uses, change in allowed housing types. So for example, we see a lot of requests for in the single family. Applicants have wanted to also include duplexes and triplexes within their project. And then established uses which would not otherwise be allowed, which isn't currently allowed, but moving forward, we'd like to allow that. And then in some cases, a plan development is used to plan for a large development. Roberts Ranch is a good example. Roberts Ranch is a larger housing development, and one planned development could have been done for the whole site, but instead every subsequent applicant has come in asking for a planned development. So in that case, it's really used as a tool to plan for everything else. It can be much more helpful when looking at a larger scale, a larger land mass for a developer. Some examples, this is a very old school example, but with the standard R1 single family detached lot size setbacks, you get the example on the left is what people typically come up with when they are laying out their, let's say, square property. That is what you would need to meet your front yard, rear yard, lot coverage, and lot size requirements. Now, a developer, for some reason, let's say it's a sensitive, like there's sensitive ecological areas on the property, maybe there's some hills, maybe they want to offer up a unique kind of housing type. And so a developer, for this example on the right, as you can see, the setbacks get kind of changed. Obviously, they're reduced, the lot sizes become smaller. But in granting this sort of waiver from the standards, and the applicant creates this big green belt around it, which provides a unique housing type for a city. So that's one example of why a plan development might be requested. The example on the left, you can see this housing development that's a plan development. The houses are closer together than would be allowed in an R1. They are single family detached, and that front yard setback is quite reduced. But this is a unique housing development, something you might not see very often, in that you have front yard porches, you have unique housing designs. This is a different type of thing that you would otherwise see. They're on smaller lots. And so you kind of get a unique benefit to the city by a unique design, attractively designed development, and a different type of housing type that could be more affordable to homeowners. On the smaller lots, they tend to have lower home prices. The one on the right is what you would see in a typical bungalow development, where you have this interior area that you walk in, to access the front of the homes. The garages are at the rear, but again, the property lines and the minimum lot sizes and the setbacks, if you apply that strict standard, can't be met. But this is again, another example of a unique design and something you'd want to encourage because it promotes diversity within the city. You have another unique housing development that you might not otherwise get if you require them to follow the standard development standards. One of the things we kind of briefly touched on in the last meeting is the performance overlay standards. And that's section 17.14.010 of the zoning ordinance. And this is an overlay designation, which means that the underlying zoning district is established. So for example, R1, and then they have an overlay. This is part of the overhaul that was conducted in 2008. In 2008, the performance overlay was brought on. And at that time, it seems that the intent was to allow for reduced lot sizes and a wider range of housing types in the city. It's specifically called out in the performance overlay. It discusses those two things as the reason for why someone would have the performance overlay. The way that people get the performance overlay is they rezone their property to the performance overlay. And then they then have to get further approvals for their reduced setbacks. So if I'm a property owner and I'd like to annex my property into the city, I could choose to rezone my property to R1 performance overlay if I wanted to. You are not required to take advantage of this performance overlay. We found that most people are taking advantage of it, but there are things that just because they have the performance overlay, it doesn't mean they get to move forward with what they want. They still have to follow all the city procedures. This section of the code is very complicated as well. It outlines a cumbersome process. It is conflicting, and this is kind of an area that we've identified as an issue as part of this plan development, and I'll discuss it in a little bit more detail in a couple minutes. The reason that I just discussed that is at the Planning Commission meeting, the Planning Commission asked. I have a handout. At the last Planning Commission meeting, the Planning Commission really wanted a feel for what are some of the recently approved plan developments that we've done in the city. And in 2008, the code was changed. And so things are done a little bit differently. Prior to 2008, plan developments were conducted through a rezone, and we do have several in the city. And then in 2008, things changed with the code. And so I went back and looked at what are the ones that we've approved since 2015. And so Eva just handed out, it's in your staff report as well, but it's a list of the approved plan developments since 2015. And when you look at it, what you can see is most of the plan development requests are for properties that are in the performance overlay zoning district. The most common request is for a 5-foot interior side yard setback in the R1 district. And the municipal code requires 6 feet. So most people are asking for a reduction of 1 foot. And then other requests include housing types. One I just mentioned is in the R1, we see a request quite often for duplexes and triplexes. Duplexes just changed in the code, so that will no longer be an issue. With Senate Bill 9, the ordinance we just passed, one of the recommendations was to change the allowed housing types to include those housing types anyways, because they're going to be allowed with SB 9. So now they're just allowed for everyone. So that wouldn't be that no longer becomes a reason for a plan development, but we do see people asking for triplexes and fourplexes in the R1 district.
A question, Erica, on the, let's say, a scenario where, like you're rebuilding a garage, a detached garage, and it to get a turnaround because of the constraints of the site, you can't meet the current setback for the garage, so you're asking for a reduced setback because of the peculiarities of the site. Would that be a variance then?
That would be a variance.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, so,
Plan development is intended to encompass like a larger area.
so some,
because
like an increment of a plan unit development would be a variance application.
It, in a sense, yes, a plan development is really a wide-based variance, but variances are only allowed for particular reasons. Let's say in your example, maybe your lot shape is irregular, and so the garage, I can't fit a garage on my property.
Right.
So you can get a variance for that. This is more of a thoughtful approach to planning where the zoning ordinance is very strict. This allows flexibility for the developer and the city as well to kind of come up with different ways of designing developments to meet today's needs, to offer different housing choices.
It's more like a wider scale
Yeah, it's a
too.
wider Scale
Okay.
type situation.
Thank you.
So one of the other questions from the last meeting was, how would we process plan developments? And the process will be mostly the same as existing. So an applicant could apply for a preliminary review before they submit to the city. They can ask a specific question. They can say, what do you think? I have a bubble diagram, and that's their opportunity to receive feedback from the city before they spend their money, draw up plans, print out plans, and submit to and pay their fee and submit to the city. So that's an option to every developer. Once, if they chose to, or if they chose not to, then they would apply for their application. They would submit for their application, and that will entail the submittal of the application, the submittal of their plans, and the submittal of the fee. And we're not recommending a change to the application fee, so that the fee is recommended to stay the same. And as part of this overhaul, we are going to come up with a very clear, let's say, handout on what is a plan development, what is the process, and what are the submittal requirements. So that will be encompassed with this overhaul as well. And hopefully my intent is to have kind of a draft version so you can see it along with the ordinance, so you can see, what applicants will get or will have available to them so that they can help them through this process. And then, just as we discussed before, we go through our completeness review. This is probably going to be accompanied in most cases by some other sort of request, and it gets routed to our DRC. They get comments, then they have to resubmit, then we review it again. Hopefully that's all we have to do. If they don't address everything, comments come back. And then at some point, hopefully not too far in the future, the application is deemed complete. Some people take a long time. Once that's complete, they go to a planning commission for a public hearing. The planning commission for rezone will recommend approval to the city council, and then the city council has the final action. I believe that it will only take one more month than the current process. That being said, I think with a lot of what we're doing, our processes are going to start becoming faster. And so on our end, I can't control the applicants. So it shouldn't be too much of a burden on them. We have the month, but it's really staff doing all the work. And that would be to go to a rezone. So as part of what the Planning Commission requested at the last meeting was looking into, are there other ways in which we can kind of ease the burden of changing this process on the applicants? And so staff is recommending a few amendments to the zoning ordinance. One would be to phase out that performance overlay zoning district from the zoning district. There are only a few vacant parcels right now within the city that have that. There's not very many. They could, so those properties which are vacant can come forward with their planned development. It's the same price. It would only take an extra month and will really get them a rezone, clear set of guidelines for their property and make it easier on them if they chose to take advantage of the smaller lot size and the other enhancements that most planned development, most performance overlay zoning districts request. For properties who want to annex into the city, they can pre-zone to planned development. If they pre-zone to planned development, they will establish their base zoning district in that pre-zone. They can establish their setbacks and development standards. And they have eliminated some steps for themselves and some application fees later. So for a property wishing to annex, this now makes it a more economical and faster process for them, because now we're eliminating these other steps that we have in the zoning ordinance. And they're zoning themselves, they're pre-zoning themselves anyways. Most of them are pre-zoning to R1 PZ performance overlay or multifamily overlay. And in this case, they would just, instead of saying that, they're going to say planned development. This also then would allow it, you know, planned development will be allowed for other properties within the city. They can now rezone to planned development should they choose to. What staff would like to do is we do have all of this list of planned developments that we've approved throughout the years that we, in most cases, have no way of knowing that they exist. And we would like to, after the overhaul is complete, rezone these properties at the city's initiation. So at our expense. And what we do is, I'm just looking at one. So we have one that's CUP 2016-3. We would rezone it to planned development 2016-3. So now it's on the zoning map. It's on GIS. Everyone knows that the property within, if I have a house in that planned development, I know that I'm in a planned development. I can look up my regulations. I can see it if I'm using the county GIS, or if I call staff, they can easily find it. Otherwise, in most cases, we do not know that they are zoned planned development or they have a planned development approved. Mm-hmm.
So realize if you do that, not knowing what you could render some legal non-conforming doing that.
To rezone.
Yeah.
So it's we think we found all of them. And so our intent is to go and then city initiates rezones all these.
Depending on what we do with the plan development as far as setbacks and lot coverage, okay, that's what you said it there, but it doesn't match with what's over here. When you rezone these to that plan development that we're gonna settle what the criteria is, some of them aren't gonna conform.
So, so when we rezone them, so for my example, the 2016-3, the standards that we established under 2016-3, that's their zoning now. So their plan development says, I am plan development 2016-3, and that 2016-3 lists all of their standards. So every time a plan development comes in, the plan development really has to establish, what are my setbacks? What is my lot coverage? What is my parking? What is my height? What if someone asks for a change in height? So every properly done plan development lists their requirements. So to rezone them, we're just changing the title. All those standards still.
Existing developments here that you're gonna rezone.
Commissioner Lenore. Yes, we would rezone them to reference essentially the approved conditional use permit for plan development resolution number and resolution. So their approval, so that they and or staff can easily find, because right now, for example, this CUP 2016-3 that we're talking about on the zoning map, that's zoned R1 LPZ. But their setbacks our front is 10 feet with a 17-foot garage, the side is 4 and the rear is 10. Whereas CUP 2016-4 on the zoning map, which is the one below it, is also zoned R1 LPZ, but their setbacks are 5. So what we would do in the rezone is CUP 2016-3 would just refer to the approved plan development. So their zoning would be exactly as it is now. It's just referential. So we would refer to 2016-3 so that we can pull up that CUP resolution that tells us the front setback is 10, the side is 4, the rear is 10. And no, they would all be different.
There, yeah.
Yeah, because you have to be careful, we don't make things non-conforming.
Yeah, we would be referring specifically to their approvals so that they wouldn't be zoned, they wouldn't all be zoned. The PD and the proposal would be that each PD is unique to the site. Whereas right now, a lot of our PDs are in this overlay zone, but they are unique in the approval from the planning commission and or the council, depending on what level it was required for the project. But we had to do all this research to find that resolution and make sure we match it up with the properties, whereas we can show it on the zoning map and hopefully have a little bit of an easier time finding that PD that applies to those properties.
Through the chair, I'd like to give an example from the previous jurisdiction I was in. And I think that this is pretty typical of a lot of old paper files and things like that. Frequently, subdivisions would be approved with special setbacks. And it would be, okay, I've got this whole subdivision is allowed to have modified setbacks. So instead of your 20-yard front yard setback, it's a 10-yard, and then around the perimeter, maybe it was a little different, and maybe there are other conditions that are placed on this map. That subdivision itself, because of the way it was approved, the original subdivision sort of got shelved. And so it's a single family subdivision. So somebody comes in 20 years later and says, I want to add on to my house. What are my setbacks? Well, if I don't have something that's on the zoning map, something that's referring back to these special setbacks, the planners 20 years from then don't know what was previously approved. So the whole reason behind having the zoning that would say plan development 2016-01 or whatever it would be, is it gives that reference that, oh, there's something special about the site. We can go and pull what was approved and know for all of these properties, even if it's like a subdivision or something like that, that there's something special about this site. We can pull that up and say, yes, homeowner, you do have reduced setbacks, and this is what you might be able to potentially do for an addition to your site or something like that. Does that make sense?
Isn't it kind of similar to a master plan
Yes, on a large,
or a specific plan?
yeah, you can look at it kind of that, but likely on a
But the
smaller
specific
scale.
Plan areas are always noted on the zoning map.
Correct. Now, a
So
specific
you know
plan,
it's special.
right. In a specific plan, when you call it a specific plan, that gets into government code stuff, and there's all these requirements for the adoption of a specific plan. This is a much simpler way to do a smaller type of project where you don't have to comply with all of the different elements that a specific plan is required to have. A master plan similarly will have a lot more than a plan development would generally have. I think what we're talking about is these are simple. This is modified setbacks or just kind of a little bit more of a modified design. You could take it from, say, specific plan, maybe a master plan, and then plan development is kind of a smaller one down here.
The reason that staff is suggesting this rezone in, and this would be done later, so this is much further down the road. From experience, I worked in a city that did plan developments as a conditional use permit, and then in, I think, like 1995, switched over to rezone. And the experience in dealing with trying to find old plan developments in that case is very difficult. I had a person who called and asked for their setbacks and I told them the R1 setbacks. And it took a back and forth for a long time before any of us realized they were in a plan development. And the poor person just wanted to do an addition onto their house. And so there was a lot of wasted time. And then I had to go find the plan development, which then with what number, you know, it's very difficult sometimes to find things. So in doing all of that work, took a lot of time that, you know, really that homeowner doesn't need to deal with. That's, you know, the city should be able to provide an answer, hopefully in a quick amount of time. So this is trying to just put the trigger on the zoning map. So we know there's a plan development for this property and it's going to direct us to what their rules are. And so even moving forward, let's say we have a brand new property somewhere and they decide they want to have some 5-foot front yard setback and I don't know, 30 rear yard, whatever they want to do. And they call us up and say, I know I have a 30-foot rear yard setback, but I want to, you know, build all the way to my fence. Well, we can see they're in a plan development. We immediately pull it up. We say, no, you're required to have a 30-foot rear yard setback. So that's really what this is intended to do. It's to save staff time because we're going to do all this work and then hopefully we'll never have to replicate it again. So my example, that person with the addition, 5 years down the road, someone else is going to call and ask the same question and it's going to hit another planner and that's going to go, we're going to go back through it again every time for the next houses are going to last for a very long time. So the next 200, 300 years, it'll be the same process over and over again. We're trying to eliminate it. And then also by putting it on the map and telling a person where they can go to look for their own rules, it's really empowering a property owner. If they don't want to talk to staff, they have some knowledge that they, you know, can fall back on. So that's really what that's intended to do. So those are staff's recommended changes, but the Planning Commission also discussed some other changes that they might like to see to the zoning ordinance so as to maybe not require everyone to get a plan development. So just based on what we had discussed at that meeting, there was a potential to, we had discussed at that meeting to change the required side yard setback. We are seeing most applicants request a 5-foot interior side yard setback of 5. Our code requires 6. We keep approving the 5, and 5 is standard for most cities. That's probably why we keep seeing that request. So if the Planning Commission wanted to, as part of this plan development, we could modify that required side yard setback. Another request that we keep seeing is a change in housing types. You now can have the duplexes, which is a current change, but we are seeing requests for triplexes in the R1. You could eliminate the minimum lot size. We see a lot of requests for smaller lots. Senate Bill 9, in essence, changes that minimum lot size for people that want to split their own lot. So it kind of feels like the state is getting away from that minimum lot size, but that is an option to you. And if there was any other required setbacks you felt that we should modify, that's something we can look at. This is just some potential modifications that we're kind of seeing. Would you like these to be combined with this plan development? Because remember, the 17.24 is going on its own, which is all of our permit types. And then the rest of the zoning ordinance falls later. But if there were some things you'd like to see included as part of this, we could do that now, or you can say, we'll think about it and maybe later on, maybe we might want to, but that's really up to you. This is just us bringing back some discussion, some potential modifications based on discussion that we had at the last hearing. And we're really just looking for direction from you. And I have a number of questions. I thought it'd be helpful this time if we went one by one to get everyone's feedback per question. But before we get to questions, before I get to my questions, if you have any more questions for me, you can direct them at me now if you'd like. Yes.
How are we going to separate out a plan development approval and a tentative map? So you're proposing that we would go ahead and approve the tentative map and then they rezone for the plan development to go to council?
So in that case, if the plan development included a tentative map or a site and architectural review or whatever it is, you are making a decision on those things, but if the city council chose not to approve the plan development, then those approvals become invalid.
Okay.
So they rely on final approval by the council and then they take effect. That makes sense.
Oh, it makes sense. I understand. I don't know that I agree with that, but I understand. I also know that there's discussion on the council level for taking tentative maps to the city council. I think this is just the first step. And I have strong feelings about that as far as being a planning commissioner. And I've sat here before. This is a place where you do planning. And I don't know, I think you might know that when you go into the council, it gets political. And I don't never want to see planning go into that area because it's been separated until now. So I have some strong feelings, folks, because I've sat here and I've sat there. So we do good planning right here.
I totally agree. I think, I don't, I don't understand why the city council has to approve the plan unit developments. Why this is what we do. We do planning here.
So this.
Totally qualified to do it.
So this is a change in how we do it. Remember, most cities require a rezone for a plan development. For what was it, 22 cities? I found one and it was Fresno that doesn't do a rezone. So this is not something unique. This is something that's mostly done by opening it up to the plan development. Or by opening it up to a rezone, that's where we are now allowing for the uses. So there's other things that we can now allow. We're broadening what we can do through the plan development. Right now it's narrow. And it's just like if someone was requesting a general plan amendment or a rezone as part of their project comes to you, but then the final decision is made by the city council. So that's the same process that we have today. With the most requests that we're having for plan developments is that overlay zoning district. So the council looked at it at one point and a person choosing to annex, because you're annexing usually into the performance overlay, they can establish their rules, those sorts of rules at that time. They're already going for a rezone. And this is changing what is the name of that rezone in that case. By establishing this performance overlay with that allowance that they can already ask for the housing type and they can already ask for the reduced lot sizes, those trigger other things. A smaller lot, you cannot have a standard R1 setback. It's just not possible. You can go down to 2,500 in the performance overlay. So these are things that we're already allowing for. It's in essence a different process, but it's also opening it up to more people within the city to allow them to have some flexibility as well.
So this is based on the rezone then, because the rezone would have a greater impact, with lack of a better word.
No.
Then you're saying that it should be subject to the city council because it requires more of a participation.
If I might add one thing too, part of this too, and it kind of goes back to Erica's previous slide, is that when we have these kind of standard requirements in the R1, that's something that, I mean, as Erica mentioned, we're on the kind of permit processes part of the zoning ordinance right now, but we want to get to those sections in 1704. These are the development standards we currently have for R1 and R2 and R3 and our downtown mixed use and our neighborhood mixed use. And those are questions where we could modify the base zoning regulations, like for instance, for now, a relatively simple change would be modifying that base R1 requirement from a 6-foot setback, which it currently is, to 5 foot. And then that's not something now that's going to require this plan development. So if there's base modifications, we can think about them now, but we can also think about them as we go through this zoning overhaul process about what do we want to allow everywhere in the R1? Do we want to just always allow a triplex proposal in the R1? Then it's not going to require this rezone process or plan development process anymore. Do we want to always allow a 5-foot setback, or do we want to always allow maybe a 3,000 square foot minimum lot size as opposed to the 5 or 5,500 that we currently have? So that's something where in this overhaul process, we want to come out of it with base regulations for our zones that we're happy to see come up when those proposals come through. And so we want to think about the developments we've seen, the ones that we liked in the R1 PZ or in the R3 PZ or in the neighborhood mixed use. And if it was something that we had to give an exception for, but we saw it 5, 10, 15 times and we liked it every time we saw it, we can think about having that allowed in that zone.
And just to kind of go along with what Eva said, we're seeing the same requests over and over and over. So especially in the R1 performance overlay, you're not seeing a house design with that. You're seeing a map, and we're approving these setbacks and lot sizes consistently. And so if we're consistently doing it, the question to you is it something you need them to keep asking us for, or would we just like to change the zoning ordinance? You know, if it's a plan development should be kind of a one-off, right? You have a unique idea, you want to do something cool. But if people keep asking for the same thing over and over and over again, and we're approving it, that is a signal to us that there's something else in that zoning ordinance that, you know, maybe we need to change, right? We're continuously saying, yes, we agree to have a mix of housing types in the R1, as long as you meet your density, or yes, that 5-foot side yard setback is what we're gonna, you know, keep allowing. I mean, it's 5 foot is consistently across the board, whatever everyone's asking for. The lot size is another one. We keep allowing for a reduction in lot size. So those are things that we can amend the zoning ordinance. That's the planning commission then dictating how these developments look. And it's really eliminating the need for a plan development and gets back into what a plan development is intended for. But we are approving these plan developments for the most part. Everything in R1, you know, we're not looking at design when we're looking at it, but we're waiving the requirement for type, we're waiving the setbacks, and we're waiving the lot size.
No, because the PD always required design review. It was only the R1, the straight R1 did not have any design review criteria. But once it entered the CUP area, then we had say over how it's gonna look. Because it's a conditional use permit of plan development. So we did, because with the ones coming in on the West Gateway, that followed that process.
So I can only speak for since 2015, but there's no design with them.
R1 has never had design review, but anything outside of that and the performance overlay.
Right, so
Design review.
right, so like in the medium density, we're looking at it. Downtown mixed use, we're looking at design, but not in the low density, which is where we're approving a lot, or R1, sorry.
Single family residential R1 is the only development in Hollister that doesn't require a design review.
Mhm.
But if you stick a PD on it, then it does.
We
But
have
we just
not
talked
yet.
about that
Yes.
just not too long ago about R1 having to, now we're changing that. We're looking
So-
at a design review.
So so the code explicitly tells us to do things that previous leadership we have not been doing. So there are things in this code that we are not following. We
I believe that.
recommended we brought it to the planning commission where we had the design standards and we had the recommendation that R1 require planning commission review and plan development. We wanted to see what the design was. And the council ultimately decided not to make a decision on it. So it's not in the code right now.
Say that again. What did they do or didn't do?
So staff before brought forward some zoning ordinance amendments, and there were a couple in there. We added findings to site and architectural review because there's no findings in the code right now. We were going to change that R1 statement because even though the code says R1, that doesn't encompass things with the performance overlay. And then we had the whole issue with west of Fairview. It's not zoned R1, but previous leadership determined that R1 was something that is just a single family. So we wanted to clear that up. And that was included on that. We wanted to look at the design for plan developments, and we had design standards that staff wrote. And we took it to council, and ultimately they decided not to make a decision either way. So
I don't
those
remember
changes
that.
are
Must
not
have been
codified.
after.
It's not
Yes,
in the
that,
code.
that was brought before the planning commission, before you had been appointed, Commissioner Lenore.
No, but I mean, it was while I was off the council because I don't.
Yes, it was
remember.
recent. It was within the past 4 months or so.
Okay,
Maybe 4 months ago.
I try to watch everything. I must have missed that.
So as of right now, there is a cumbersome process for that performance overlay zoning district that we do not follow. We do not require design review of a plan development. You just ask for it. And that has been based on previous leadership.
We do not require a design review on plan developments.
Since I've been here, Commissioner Lenore, the only time that we've had design review on plan developments is when it's also a plan development that has had a multifamily component or some kind of commercial component. We've never had design review on our plan developments that are purely single family detached. So for some, an example I'm thinking of is, if you'll recall, the Clower subdivision that was off of Santa Ana and LeBeg, they had a site and architectural review, but that was purely by the coincidence of that having a triplex component to that plan development. And so the design review, that all that the planning commission approved for design was the design of that triplex. Another example, actually a recent example, which the design review didn't come before the planning commission, but there is a condition that design review will come before the planning commission, is for development in the DAL properties, Kramer Commons subdivision that's within the Chapel Road area. That's in the R1 LPZ. That was a tentative map recently approved by the planning commission. And that plan development proposal was to also include duet properties. So that's not a single family attached product. And those designs for just the duet portion will have to come back before the planning commission, but we've never processed design review for single family at the planning commission level in my tenure here.
Ever. It's never occurred.
The only one has been KB, which was for the cluster lots that included the plan development. But that's because the DA told them that they had to get a site and architectural review. So,
West Fairview is a whole nother animal. They have their own zoning.
yes.
They have, that's different.
But
but
again, west of
everything-
Fairview, those are single family properties zoned west of Fairview.
Right, they're zoned West Fairview with their own
Previous-
regulations.
Previous leadership, they did not require certain site and architectural review.
No, it never has, not for single family. I don't know that I want to do design review for single family. The developers pretty much take care of it. It's all look the same. I mean, yeah, is that what you're talking about? We would have more leeway
Well-
there. So we're gonna get into designing R1, design requirements for R1. We have to have a plan.
So with the single family, we're not there yet. That's a wider discussion we'll have as we're going over this entirety of 17.24. We are going to look at every process we have and what we're going to require permits for. So that the R1 issue is a much different,
So we're not there yet.
we're not there
Okay,
yet.
thank you.
Yeah, and
We're just doing plan developments, but it
Right
is gonna
now,
come up down the road.
it will come up.
will.
It's going to come up soon and we'll go back over what we had talked about before, but that's in the broader context. Right now, we're just looking at plan development and
thanks.
if there's anything else you want changed to the zoning ordinance now as part of this plan development situation, or if you would definitely like to take a deeper dive when we get into the next phase of the zoning ordinance, or that's what we're trying to get answered for us today, so I know how to proceed with writing the ordinance.
I have some comments for the chairman, being the chairman. I'm struggling with the zoning ordinance coming before the general plan. I was gonna bring it up later. This is for me totally backwards. Kevin, I've never seen zoning ordinance regulations come prior to a general plan. Because the general plan sets the general plan and then you further delineate with the zoning. So I just can't grasp this process for anything, because how do we know what the general plan is gonna say? And the general plan dictates the uses. And then the zoning ordinance dictates all the setbacks and all that stuff, all the criteria. So how do I know what I'm doing if I don't know where it's what's going on with the general plan?
That's a
I was gonna ask you at the end of the meeting, and I'm still gonna do that. I'll wait until then, but I'm really struggling, Christie, with the way this is going. Maybe it's, and I've been here before, and I've done 2 general plans with this city. We've never done this, ever.
So a study session was held many months back between the planning commission and the city council, and we adopted this process. This is not like tomorrow you have the zoning ordinance. This is going to take a very long time. We've had 2 meetings on just plan development, and you don't even have a draft ordinance in front of you, and there are many sections in the zoning ordinance. What we are trying to do right now, which really is different than what the general plan does, what we're trying to do right now is the permits that are required. What is a general plan amendment? What is a specific plan? What is a plan development? What's a temporary use permit? The general plan does not get into that sort of nitty.
I know that.
Permit type. But even in that sense, this section might not, as staff, we'd like it to be approved tomorrow because we have a number of issues with it, but obviously it has to be written. You have to look at it. You have to go to hearing. So let's say permit section of the zoning ordinance, this is our section that we're working on right now. The general plan won't affect it at all.
How do you know?
But the general plan, for example, let's say that you take the downtown area, the general plan, what we've been talking about is for high density in the downtown general mixed use area. So if we're considering lot sizes and open space requirements and those types of provisions,
Yes.
and it's going to, the general plan will certainly have an effect on that.
So by the time we hit the end of this permit types, which is just words and it's not a design, right? By the time we hit that, get this adopted, quite frankly, the general plan has probably already been adopted. We are on a very long process here. And then the rest of that stuff follows. And yes, then we're going to capture everything. We're going to capture your thoughts. We're going to capture the general plan's thoughts. We're going to get it all together. And back to when we were talking about it, that phase of the zoning ordinance is going to take a really, really, really long time. So it's not like this is being done within 2 weeks. We're working on the stuff we can work on now because the general plan is not going to affect the site and architectural review process. But that other stuff that you mentioned, like if there's, design standards for the downtown, if there's a recommended new zoning district for residential, those things are going to follow much later. And with the process of the plan for adoption of the general plan we are not even going to be close to that. We'll be much later. This is a lot of work. If you think about, we just had 2 study sessions for a plan development, and then I have to write an ordinance. And then site and architectural review is probably going to take at least a study session, conditional use permits, at least a study session, temporary use permits, at least, we're going forward in a longer path, let's say.
Yeah, just to add to that, the benefit for us looking at all of this now, as the general plan is being written, is that instead of us potentially, say we weren't working on the zoning ordinance at all, we wait till the general plan is adopted, then we start this process, you wouldn't see updates to the zoning ordinance probably for the next 3 years. So this is a parallel process to take care of our permit types. The other thing is that with the adoption of Acela, we kind of need to know what we're, what is our process, so we can actually like get it into Acela, so we have all of our permitting. So there's a lot of different purposes for what we're doing right now. What we're biting off right now are those permit types, those more complicated, maybe things that the general plan will impact. Those are modifications we can definitely make. If the general plan tells us to do a different thing, then that's where we'll modify that portion of the zoning ordinance. So it's not getting out ahead of the general plan or changing anything necessarily. It's clarifying, cleaning up, making a lot more sense out of what our current ordinance says. Processes, yeah.
And we have a general plan now, correct? We're
Yeah,
underneath the general plan now.
we have an existing general plan.
Yeah, so.
And
Goes through this year.
And with the permit types, if we can do this now, it helps with when we adopt the new general plan, because right now we have a zoning ordinance that is conflicting. It requires things that we haven't been requiring. We are not following all of it. There are inconsistencies within. And so it is becoming it's difficult for staff, but as a developer or as a planning commission, someone trying to follow it, it is becoming, I think it's slowing down the planning process. And we don't want to make it more of a burden than it should be. We'd like to get through this, while we can. The general plan is then going to dictate other things that we definitely have to do. And this is kind of getting a step ahead, especially with Acela, as Christy mentioned, that, we need to have that ready to go and, make it clear to people. We'd like to have more information for people on how they go through our process, but it's something we can't do right now because we have a zoning ordinance that is telling us to do one thing and we're not doing it, or it conflicts. And how do you write a handout for someone in that scenario?
And I'll be very direct. Our department gets a lot of complaints that the planning process is slow. My project has taken a year, 2 years, 5 years. It could be on the applicant. It could be a multitude of things. Planning can be slow, with CEQA and that. So we're taking the directive that we've gotten and are trying to do these parallel processes. General plan is going to help. But that's one of the main reasons that looking at our ordinances, how can we be more user friendly? How can we give better customer service? How can we process projects faster and more accurately? So that is really the crux of the issue with, yes, planning can be slow sometimes, but let's get the barriers out of the way. So, we can actually do some good planning instead of constantly searching and looking, dealing with all these inconsistencies in our code, and get some good projects out there. So it's kind of one of the real main reasons. That's why we're really excited about it too, because we'd like to be able to do good projects and feel confident when we're presenting something that one, you guys had a lot of you're doing a lot of work here, and that you've had a lot of input into this much better process.
Any more questions?
Any more presentation?
Well, I have my questions that I need some answers to, if you want to help me out. Should we do the first question? So the first question is, should the list of typical exceptions, and it's page 2 or 3 of your staff report, be allowed in Hollister? And that is the kind of typical, the setbacks, lot sizes, lot coverage. So if you're okay with that, or is there anything else you want to open up a plan development for? I don't know, height, whatever you might come up with.
Are we covering all those things? I mean, the city has a height requirement. I'm more familiar with the downtown area, but we have height maximum now, correct?
So right now, I mean, in your straight zoning district, you have setbacks, lot size, lot coverage, open space for multifamily. Your allowed dwelling types,
You have floor area ratios.
yeah, floor area ratio or lot coverage depending on the zoning
Yeah.
district. So we've established those in your base zoning district.
Yeah.
The question is, what do you want to allow plan developments for? Do you want to allow them for setbacks, which we've been doing? Do you want to allow them for lot size, which we've been doing? Lot coverage, we've been doing, open space, we've been doing.
Landscape requirements too, landscape percentage.
You want to allow for a reduction in landscape?
Well, you have a state law to comply with there, don't you? Or is that just commercial? For landscaping, it's a certain percentage.
I'm not familiar with
Well,
the
maybe it's
state
our
law
ordinance.
requirement,
It's
but like,
our
it's,
local
yeah,
law.
it would be a local.
We
requirement.
increased it before, I remember too.
Yes.
We did that.
It's not, the landscaping isn't a huge amount. Most, I think, developments we've seen recently, they're way over it anyways. So if you wanted to waive, it, we could include that in like something permissible. I came up with a list. It's just, are you okay with this list? And for the most part, it's what we've been doing anyways. And if you were okay with it, is there anything else you want to allow for in this plan development?
So you're saying there's no height limit in the current plan development?
Right now, we don't allow for a height exception.
Oh, an exception, but there's a maximum height,
Yeah,
correct?
there's always,
Yes.
35 feet or something? I don't know.
depending on your zoning.
Depending on the
district.
zone, right? If it's West Gateway, it's 50 feet. I know, because I'm working on a project there. Uh-oh, I spilled the beans.
It is 50 feet in the
Whoops.
west.
You did.
So it's just, are you okay with this list, which is what we've, for the most part, been doing anyways, except for uses, which we've already talked about, that we're open to allowing. And then if this list is still okay, is there anything else you want to allow someone?
What
to-
page is the list on?
Page 2 of your staff report? I can.
Okay, I'm getting there. I'm a little rusty.
So this is like typical requests and what we've been, with the
Okay.
exception of the uses, because we've already discussed that. This is what we're allowing for now, but is there anything else you want to allow someone to request a plan development for?
Didn't you mention neighborhood commercial type use?
That would be the established uses, which would otherwise not be allowed. So the neighborhood commercial in an R1 is my example, or now I'm a commercial, I'm in the M1 and I want a plan development because I want to allow an auction yard. So the planning commission seemed pretty, all 5 of you on, you're okay with uses. So I just included it in this list.
Seems like height would be a kind of a fundamental thing that someone might want an exception for. Is how does the commission feel about
I'd like to include
allowing
height in
exceptions?
that. I can think of scenarios that you might want a deviation from the current height requirement, the land use based on certain circumstances.
We should,
creative design.
Would you, I just off the top of my head, would you be willing to look at? I don't know if they wanted taller fences.
no, the cops don't want that.
I'm just trying to think of like crazy requests I've seen in my lifetime.
Maybe we could, maybe David, maybe we could set some kind of a height requirement when it's gonna abut single family. That's something we might be able to do. That's always not good.
Yeah,
I always love to see the single family around the kind of the perimeter. It just depends on what's next door. So that would
well,
be
again, it'll
something.
be something that you look at with a planned development where,
Neighborhood conformity.
yeah, we'd be
It-
looking at like, how does it fit in with the surrounding neighborhood? And you could say, oh my gosh, you cannot have, I don't know, whatever it is, like, you need to have a landscape buffer between.
Cause
you
the
and a
neighbors
single
come
family.
out for that.
Yeah,
They see a subdivision next door and they see the 2-story and they're 1-story. It's a big issue.
yes.
And then when there's a grade level difference, makes it even worse.
It might be something that is part of the plan development negotiation where you negotiate a buffer between you, the project and the adjacent use. But again, you know, without seeing the plan development, it's hard to say.
But we could require single story as well. And a plan development, if you wanted to.
Yeah,
Well,
Or if you're trying to meet a density requirement and you're sensitive to the surrounding neighborhood use, but within the center, you may want to go 4 stories.
that would be
I
within
mean,
the plan
and
development.
it's all layered, sensitively mitigated with the neighboring surrounding areas.
Mhm.
I can see a deviation from the land use height requirement.
Yeah.
Based
So-
on that scenario.
Yeah, that would
so we
be-
could do that with a rezone, right? We could
Yeah.
set criteria for that zoning that says da, da, da.
Well, what we do in this case is the plan development would be open for the applicant to say, and I'm just using your example, I'm a developer and I have selected this property of R3. And I'm going to do a plan development. I'm gonna have this higher density kind of type product in the center. And then as it like moves outward, I'm gonna, start lowering the density because there's single family around me. And
Mhm.
when looking at the entire project, the density matches the general plan, but now we're bringing in different housing types that wouldn't otherwise be allowed and the setbacks are getting different. And maybe that denser product gets taller. And so that's, something that you could do within a plan development. That wouldn't be allowed today.
And
You
it's
know,
up,
in a
it's
straight-
up to the applicant.
You mean a rezone plan
A
development?
rezone plan
So
development,
Read
yes.
the
A
new
rezone.
process, the new process, the new proposed process could probably maybe do that,
Yes.
And this
okay?
allows a developer is going to look at a property and they have something in their head that they think would work for the city. Maybe they have a neighbor next to them that, has already told them like, do not put anything close to me, and they'd like to, put it further away or whatever the case may be. And it allows them flexibility in their zone. The zoning ordinance is rigid. The zoning ordinance there's no gray area. You have a setback, you
You don't
have a
want gray
use, you
area.
have a parking requirement. You have to follow it, no exception. This allows more creativity in design.
I thought of another possible example, maybe in this concentrated, high density area in the middle of this project, they put a parking garage or something for those residents. But on each lot, they don't have any parking, right? You've allowed, there's enough parking across the whole project, but it's over concentrated in one area or on one lot. And then each little house, maybe their little townhomes or something in the middle, and each lot has no parking. They park down the street in their parking garage. That doesn't meet the code, right? The code says you need 2 spaces on your lot. But overall, they had 10 units and they each needed 2, and they put a little 20-car garage down the street. That would be something where a strict application of the code doesn't work, but a plan development might be the right process for that kind of a
Well, you
project.
just brought up another exception, parking,
Well.
right? You brought it up.
I'm thinking
has-
more of like putting it on the site and it's still there, but
But I like that. It's like the European concept, we're just too familiar with having to park right where we are, our living circumstances, and we don't want to walk to another parking or sequestered somewhere else. But in European, that's what they have typically, a lot of, and it works
Yeah.
very well.
And in a lot of European cities, you have in a development, they have like in a built area, they have a park. And they have little cafes around it. And under our strict zoning, that's not allowed, but it's a great idea. It's a way to activate a space. It's a way for a developer to provide a cool and unique
Mhm.
housing type. And if someone came in with that today, our code says no, but it's a great idea.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to allow for is yes, the process is gonna take you maybe a little bit longer. Hopefully it's, with what we're trying to do anyways, it's gonna be faster than it is today. But now we've opened up so much to you to assist in creating some interesting developments within the city for the residents and different housing types and different ways of living.
Does do current zoning regulations, do they regulate whether you can have roundabouts or whether you would have roundabouts in an area or not? Is that covered or not?
not zoning so much. There is a policy adopted by the city council that puts a preferential on roundabouts. But there's nothing strictly required in our engineering like standard specs for roads or right of ways or anything in zoning that's required.
Okay. What about underground things? Basements. I don't know. You typically don't see basements in California. They don't. And why is that? Yeah. Why is that?
It's usually the fault and the earthquake standards. Pretty much.
Okay.
It can be done. It's just very expensive. That's why in some cases you'll see subterranean parking garages,
Mhm.
but it's very expensive to do.
It is.
And so
Feel the
you
high
just
water table,
don't
too.
see that. You'll see it in San Francisco and stuff like that, where it's the cost of land. and stuff like that.
Basement. And the funny thing is, they moved it on Hospital Road and Roger Grimsby put the mammoth foundation with the basement. And then they moved the house there. That's where it came from, at 1024 San Benito.
Oh,
So, yeah,
wow.
eventually had a basement. It's small, but yeah.
Uh-huh. Roger put some big footings down there. Huh?
Roger did, that foundation was massive.
How about that? Good old Roger.
What about water? A lake or a pond, something like that. Is that something that's regulated by our zoning ordinances now?
I don't know that it's anything like that's kind of addressed one way or the other, honestly.
It's not prohibited. I guess if someone were to ask for it, we'd have to
I'd
really-
probably have to talk to Jennifer about
Yeah,
it.
that would be a Jennifer question.
A
No, like,
lake
if someone wanted
or,
to- oh,
yeah.
It's so droughty here. so-
I know it's not PC to talk about water, but I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, I've never had the request.
Now,
Only
now that
polls.
we're thinking outside the box, what about art elements? What about putting some public art in some of these zoning districts, requiring some type of public art?
I think that's.
So good.
Yeah, the city's actually working on
Yeah.
a public art policy
Mhm.
currently, so,
Jennifer? Mhm.
yeah.
Food for thought.
So I think everyone's okay with that list on page 2 and we're gonna height is okay. And I don't think we came up with anything else that needs to be included. So then question number 2 is that performance overlay, which is really functioning as a plan development anyways. Are you okay with phasing that out? There's only a few properties left that are vacant with it, and they are gonna request a plan development anyways in most cases.
How many was it?
It's like,
I believe there's 4, possibly 5. There are two that I can think of, which are R4 HPC near Park Hill that are vacant, and that is their current zoning. And then there are 2 properties that are R1 LPZ, which were annexed along with some of the other projects that actually had a project proposal in the Chapel Road area. There are 2 properties there. And there might have been one other, but I don't recall, but I think those are the only vacant inside of the city limits properties with this overlay as their zone. All of the rest of the properties with this zoning district have a project that is either planned or is already approved and developed. And so this phasing out, as we discussed earlier, would just be a rezone to refer back to their actual approvals.
so for the vacant ones now, they are going to ask for a plan development anyways. So it's not, we're not making them pay any more money. We're not really making them give us any more.
It's the.
Yeah, they have a one extra step, but
And they gotta go to council to get it approved
if we followed the code right now, they would be going to council.
for rezoning.
For plan development, there's a requirement in the code for a what's it called, a performance agreement?
Performance agreement with the council.
Yeah,
For the overlay zone, that. they
For the
require-
overlay
they require
zone,
a performance
that's
agreement.
currently in the code.
Right.
Which we have not been enforcing.
Correct.
Because the performance overlay is written in a it's a very difficult process to follow, but if you are a developer and you have that performance overlay, you come to the planning commission for your plan development, and then you also, after the plan development, then go to the council who has to approve your agreement. So it's adding an extra, in that case, that agreement is adding an expense and other layers, other things they must do. And so previous leadership determined that we weren't going to follow that step, but it's in the zoning ordinance and we should follow it if we kept it as is. So that requires council
So
approval.
it's something
Yeah.
that's stated on the books, but we haven't been.
Yes,
following.
and it requires council approval.
So now we're looking at it with taking not the jaundiced eye that we, I guess, we were looking at it previously and realized that the performance overlay zone, it just adds another layer of approvals.
Yeah.
But the intent was beautiful. Because that gave us the option of having more options. It was really a new thing for the city when it came about,
Yeah.
and it really opened it up for, as much as I didn't like it, lot variation. And other things. I just don't see, I don't understand exactly what you're saying. I guess because I studied the heck out of it. Because I had to learn it, and I read it, and I read it, and I read it, and I know it, and now it's gonna go away. So, and I thought it worked good. I really did.
One of the things I liked about it, I'm sorry, Carol, did I interrupt? I'm sorry. One of the things I liked about it, I know we talked about the overlay zone created some flexibility on housing types, densities and stuff like that. But as I recall, some of the overlay zone encouraged amenities. You know, like parks and pocket parks, things of that nature. Which I thought was really a nice feature and should be encouraged, especially in multi-unit development.
It encouraged circulation as well. Side the subdivision and adjacent subdivision.
So if we can still, I can understand, we're making a simpler process, but if we can still encourage, for example, what I just brought up, parks, amenities, walkability, those type of features somehow, that'd be great.
So, yes, we can word it that we'd like. Yeah, we can put. It's easier to discuss like that kind of like real detail, like once it's drafted, but I know what direction you're talking about.
And for all of the commission, except for Commissioner Lenore, who's newer to it, if you'll recall when Erica brought forward that site and architectural and design review chapter, which again, the council chose not to take an action on it when it was brought before the council after the planning commission's recommendation, but we had discussed adding one finding to this plan development section, and that was kind of getting at what you're talking about, Commissioner Huboy. It was a finding, and I don't have the exact language, but it was about, does this plan development provide some sort of unique feature that gives an enhancement to the people who are going to live there? And I believe that finding specifically mentioned an examples such as additional open space or providing public art within that project, or a unique use that provides like an enhanced living for people who are there that wouldn't otherwise have that direct access to the use. So that was a finding that we had recommended putting into this section, and that's something we can definitely keep in our proposed rewrite, is having findings like that, so that when you're reviewing these proposals, you say, you're asking us for an exception. We find that it's providing something great, and that's why we want to give it to you.
Will we still be in the new rezone EV? Will we still have the ability? Will that process or those criteria encourage the development of affordable housing? Is that a lot size kind of thing?
I mean, affordability comes into play in many cases. A developer could choose to provide extra affordable housing, say, I would like you to waive all the front yard setbacks, and I'm going to give you 20 units of affordable housing. And you could find that, yes, that we like that. That's providing affordable housing for the community. But there's also affordability by design. A small lot house
That's true.
is going, if I have a 2,000 square foot house on a 2,500 square foot piece of land, or if I have a 2,000 square foot house on a 10,000 square foot property, there's a price difference, right?
Oh,
You're
yeah.
paying for land. So you could choose to say, you are providing such a unique small lot development. We are so excited. We have this middle type housing for homeowners. We think this meets the intent of the code. The findings do two things. One is it's the legal record that staff is leaving behind so that somebody knows why this project was approved. So, someone goes like, hey, they got to do it over there. Why can't I do it? We can go read the findings and say exactly what the purpose was. But those findings also help the planning commission, because now this is what the planning commission is looking for. I am looking for a public benefit such as a park. I am looking for a unique housing type, and that tells the developer what that plan development needs to really include.
Okay.
So we're still on question number 2. But we're really
You want a chairman? Do you want answers now or?
Look, yeah, on the performance overlay, we're just going question by question.
Right.
So for question number 2, what are your
We have
thoughts on
consensus on two.
phasing out that performance overlay, and people are just going to use the plan development now instead of having this 2-step?
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Since there's only a handful of properties, we're not gonna shake them up too bad. And you're right, they'll probably come with some kind of PD request anyway.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it as well. Is anyone not okay with it? Okay, I guess it's a yes.
Okay, so this is like a future question. This will not happen for a long time because this overhaul is going to be a lot of work. So this is something that will be done, let's say, 3 years down the road. Would you like us to rezone those overlay properties where they have that approved plan development and they have their own established requirements? Would you like us, staff, to initiate a rezone of those properties to make them plan development? So it'd be plan development with their number. So then that would be on the zoning ordinance map, and then people would be freely able to see that their property is zoned plan development, or do you want to leave them as is? Because this is a staff time kind of cost.
I think you made the argument that it will save you time in the long run because you have to put the work in up front, and then also make it easier for the customers, or to be able to look up and see. So to me, it makes sense.
So I'm on board. It doesn't cause a problem of non-conforming.
Okay.
So I believe it's a yes. Is there any no's? Okay. It's a yes.
Number 4, should the city modify the plan development as we were discussing today? And if there's any other things you'd like to see in the revised plan development section, I think we kind of cover that, the public benefit, the findings. But if there's anything else that you really want to let me know.
I want to bring up, I don't know if this is right now, but where do we address senior needs? What could we do for the seniors? I mean, I don't know what I'm trying to ask, but
Do you mean-
walkability, of course, we already do that, right?
Are you talking about like the design of a development? Or are you talking about like the interior things?
Yeah,
Like the
well,
light
there's
switches.
walkability to other areas, but we already do that, right? I mean, we already look at that, right? We look at walkability and what, if it's near services, we try to make them all connect.
Yeah.
Certainly schools are an issue with that as well.
We do. I mean, there's some things in the zoning ordinance right now. I think you'll be happy with the general plan. Because it really, the draft so far, we have a lot about walkability and.
I'd sure like to see it,
I know, and connections to adjacent.
and I'm gonna see it soon. Yeah. Oops. I want to meet with you on the process of that too, because, yeah, in private. I want an update from the consultant. Personally himself. But we'll talk about that. I might be the only one.
So then number 5. And then the 6 that's not in here, and then this 6 really gets to. Do you, with this plan development, and these would be minor changes now, and then obviously with the general plan, we're really looking at the entirety of the zoning ordinance. With this plan development now, because this phase is getting done first, is there anything you want in the zoning ordinance now? Like we talked about the 5-foot side yard setback, allowing different housing types. Is there anything you want to be included now? Because that was a topic of discussion at the last study session, so that's why I'm asking it now. Is there anything you want to change in the zoning ordinance now, or do you want us to remind you of this discussion when we hit that phase of the zoning ordinance and we can look at those things then? It's entirely up to you. I brought this because it was a topic of discussion amongst you at the last meeting where you had asked, is there any changes we can make right now to maybe reduce the need for a plan development? But again, it was a statement by you, so I'm at your direction.
Did we answer question 5?
5 is kind of what I'm talking about right now. So
Okay.
5, the 6 in your staff
Okay.
report, it's really changes to the zoning ordinance if you want any now, or if you want to wait.
With 5, just the building code for a residential occupancy requires 5 feet from the property line. If it's closer, there's fire rating issues. A lot of applicants don't realize though that you have a projecting element, and if the overhang is too far into the 5 feet, then they have to fire rate it. But I don't think that we're getting, that's probably getting overly technical here. For example, we talked about the scenario of a 4-story building that requires an elevator.
Mhm.
That's not for us to tell the applicant you have to put an elevator in there.
Right.
But this
It's
is,
code.
it's sometimes they miss the setback issue, although now the residential code will allow a 1 foot, I think, into the 5 feet but you have to put a fire block to protect the underside of the overhang. I mean, just forgive me for being overly technical, but I think 5 feet is fine. It goes along with the building code. We can't go less than that. I think that we're gonna be coming into some issues. So as long as we go along and with the setback, to go reduce it from 6 to 5, I think that I would say yes.
So like as a now type with the plan development along with this? You wanna
Yes,
do
I would
now?
say.
You know, it used to be 10% of the lot width with a minimum requirement of 6. And a maximum requirement of 8, so it always depended on the lot width, but now the lots are so dang small. I'm gonna voice right now that I do not like the 5-foot setback. I
Well,
want
in
6.
King,
The houses are too
I'm
close
sorry.
together.
I don't think we need to change anything in the zoning code at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because we're
so-
gonna be doing that in the future anyhow.
So this is, we can, if this was based on some discussion that you had, so we were bringing in some options. I did the review of the PD. This is what we've been approving. If you want to include this now, we can. Otherwise, we'll just wait until phase 3.
So I'll just wait,
Want to wait?
yeah.
I would prefer to wait.
Okay, let's wait.
How about you guys?
I think it's fine to wait too.
Okay, so when we get there, we'll have a brief discussion
Right.
for every section in the code. So let's say I'll give you R1 as an example. We'll go through all that together and I'll ask you, remember when we discussed plan developments, you want to keep it as is, you want to change anything? And then, we can go from there. And then if you're like, well, we might consider it, but we want you to come back and tell us, what does everyone have for rear yard setback in the cities around us? Give us some more information. At that point, obviously, we'll do a deep dive in all those sections of the code.
Sounds good.
Well, then that's the end of all my questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the study session. We'll move on to planning department reports.
I don't believe I have any reports. Christy, did you have any reports?
No specific reports. Well, so just an update for the rest of the planning commission. I believe Commissioner Lenore, you're signed up for
Yes,
the academy.
I'm excited.
Did
love
Commissioner
planning.
Dubois, did you end up getting?
Yes, I'm
signed
all
up?
signed up, ready to
You're all
go.
signed up, ready to
Yeah,
go.
I was gonna mention that on my planning commission report.
See him after he moves.
Carol and I don't know,
Time.
any other, my fellow commissioners signed up for the academy?
So we look forward to, and then
This retirees, it's easier. And he's in his own business.
What's that? Oh,
I said, you own your own business and I'm retired, so.
I
yeah.
know, I
We have-
know.
But the city of Holliston will be well represented at the academy with Carol and I attending.
Well,
I'll
and
give you a report,
and-
all right?
Yeah,
in
we'll give you a
order to
report.
supervise you, your interim planning manager and senior planners are going to be going as well.
All right.
Well, I'm
They
gonna.
have time to work
That's
on my
right, right.
little stuff.
Who
I heard it.
who else is going?
So Eva and Amber
Amber.
will be
All right.
also going down. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna leave my guitar at home, so I'll be
Oh,
just concentrating on planning, so don't worry about
Great.
that.
Well, very
Yeah.
excited to hear. I hope you all have a wonderful time.
You're not
And
going,
no, I wanted as it
you
was,
only had so much?
as it was, they opened up
Yeah.
eight for us. And so for the potential. And no, I'm gonna hold down for it.
Sure, I'm
Well, everybody's
visiting
gone.
with you. We'll get it done.
So that was really the only thing that I had to say. Very excited. I'm on my 7th week, y'all. If I can't believe it, and it feels like a minute. Um, couldn't do it without the support of all these amazing planners and Jennifer, of course. Thank you. You know, just and it's been really great. So
You know
I'm
what you're gonna
not
learn
going anywhere.
is
Huh?
this city is a real big family. We got new members now in our family.
I know.
But
I know.
I'm telling you, that's really, it can be very close if you mingle with the other employees and do functions here at City Hall that we're not doing anymore. We need to get back to it because it's a great family thing here, the city of Hollister.
I think so too.
I totally
think
agree
so
with
too.
that.
To answer your question, Commissioner Lenore, you had a question about the general plan status?
I do have a question. I do have a question, but
Okay.
I'm thinking I would like an update.
Okay,
I think the council would like an update. I'm pretty sure it's headed that way.
right.
But I don't mind waiting till after
Okay.
the council's updated. I just would like something to get moving.
Okay,
And I've just thought an administrative draft should have been provided to staff a year ago. But I know we were waiting for legislature to kick in.
right.
But now I'm hopefully they were working on it all that time, so we can hit the ground running. With all the various elements, you know, when we brought it to the planning commission before, it was all broken down in each element of the general plan we would bring over here and they would discuss it and then we would go back and we moved on. And then after we were almost done with that, then we were doing the zoning ordinance too, but the general plan was kind of leading the
Right.
way.
Yeah.
So this is a little bit different.
Well, we hope to have some more concrete dates for you coming up. I don't know if there's any, Eva, if there's any update that you can give?
Possibly tomorrow we'll have a concrete date, but the goal is this month and then to begin with some public outreach meetings and then GPAC meetings by the end of this month.
Okay, my next question. What is the process? You know, GPAC should be bringing their recommendation to the planning commission. The planning commission should be making recommendations to the city council. And when I read the contract the other day, or I read some GPAC stuff, it doesn't seem to be the case. So is it gonna come here to the planning commission? The GPAC should not be making recommendations to the city council.
The GPAC has not been meeting.
No, but
Right.
that's not the appropriate tool. It should be the planning commission recommending to the city council. But if you read some of the stuff that I read, it's saying the GPAC is gonna prepare stuff for council review and it doesn't mention the planning commission.
Commissioner Lenore, during the first round of GPAC meetings, all of their recommendations were brought to the planning commission, which was then the planning commission's recommendations were brought to the council for direction to staff at the beginning of the drafting process. And that is our intent for this process. So it'll be public outreach and GPAC going concurrently. And then at the end of the public outreach and the GPAC process, we'll bring a recommendation from all of those meetings to the planning commission and then a recommendation. to the
Okay,
council.
so I wasn't involved in that, but I mean, I didn't read all the planning commission minutes, but I read everything on the website for the general plan amendment. So I was just going by kind of that.
Okay, yeah, there should be all of the minutes of the GPAC and then all of the minutes and the meetings in front of the planning commission and then the
And
council.
you know what? I'm
should
gonna
be
have to
posted on
educate
it.
myself on what the planning commission has already done.
Okay,
So I will do that.
happy to
So
have a
I'll
discussion as
Make it
well.
difficult.
But yes, that at least right now is the plan that we intend to have is GPAC and public and then to the planning commission and then to the council.
Well, and planning commission in public. Because the GPAC.
Yeah, the planning, all of the meetings would be public hearings before the planning commission, before the council, and GPAC is public meetings. And then there's also some planned public specific meetings, just like community meeting about the workshop for the public about the plan.
Well, what's the status of the GPAC?
Great
I
question.
think you're gonna have to
That's a very
find
good
out.
question and I've been trying to find out.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
I wouldn't have much of an answer for you.
Yeah, I know, but we didn't set the other two because it's on hold, so.
Well,
We'll see what
I
happens.
will say this, I'm a current member of GPAC and hopefully I will continue to be part of that. Because personally, when I put a lot of work into it, I like to see it through and I when I start something, I like to carry it out.
But you're on the planning commission, so you really have the bigger honor of doing it through the planning commission as opposed to GPAC.
True.
Yeah. And GPAC's already met a few times. I'd like to move the process on. I want it here sooner than later. It should have already been here.
Very true. I
Okey
agree with
dokey.
that.
So, Christie, again, if we could get some kind of report from the consultant, I would really appreciate it, even if it's written form to all of us. I just haven't heard nothing from them. Like, what are they doing? So that's my questions.
So you would just like an update on where we are. Yeah, and
Yeah.
so our planning staff has been meeting weekly, I believe. Bi-weekly?
In the past few months, it's been bi-weekly, but otherwise it was weekly.
Yeah, with the consultants on the general plan. So there's a lot that has been going on. A lot of very very intense review of the land use section, especially by our planning staff. You'll be proud of them for, you
Awesome.
know, for what they've done in their attention to detail. So that was a big hurdle to get over, is land use section, which of course
It's always the
you
big-
all are gonna be very interested in. So I think what we can do, hopefully at the next meeting, maybe we can provide a timeline of, well, we'd like to nail down some dates, so we don't get your hopes up and then dates change.
Yeah,
But see what dates we can nail down between here.
my intent was really to go through you, by the way, because she brought it up. But out of respect for you being the chairman, maybe you could make a formal request with planning staff or city manager, or to see if the consultant could give us a briefing. I was really wanting to ask you if you wouldn't mind doing that. I'm not the chairman. Let's get into it, though.
Sure, would that, what she said?
I'm just making a request, and I want to
Yeah.
know, do you guys agree? Do you
I-
agree that we should get some kind of information on the status?
Sounds fine.
We'll do our best
All right.
to, because, and the request has come in and we've heard you loud and clear.
Yeah,
We'll do our best to give you as much information at the next meeting on
awesome.
and hopefully we'll have a better timeline. The other thing that we'll be doing is, as we get these timelines in, is populating all of that in the website, on the general plan update website, which has been kind of stalled for a little
Yeah.
while. And so the consultant is responsible for keeping that up to date.
Yeah. it's
So we
behind.
want to just get that all ramped up, and
Cool.
get things moving.
People do look at that website, community people.
Oh, I did
They
too, when
they
I was,
look at it,
when I
yeah.
was researching
It
for
needs some more to
for
it.
my interview, and I said, it'd be nice to see a little bit more on here.
Yeah,
So we
yeah.
talked to them about that.
Awesome. I do have complete confidence in our two senior planners. They know how to put a nice project out, so I do have confidence in you for that,
Thank you.
as far as good looking stuff, because I'm about aesthetics. And yeah, I could learn some stuff from you, I'm sure.
All right, any more planning department reports?
Not at this time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, we move on to planning commission reports. Anyone on the commission have something they would like to report?
I'm going to the conference.
you.
That's all. Yeah, you know.
If I could, Mr. Chair, I don't know if anyone's aware of it, but this last Saturday, I had the privilege of watching our Lady Baylor's soccer team get their first ever state title.
Awesome.
I promised the girls, they're at home listening, I would make some form of a public announcement, so it's officially on record. The Lady Baylor's brought home the title.
Congratulations, Lady Baylor's.
Congratulations, Lady
Yeah.
Baylor's.
Way to represent, right? That's awesome. Girls' sports are awesome.
Any other reports from the commission? Okay, so I was debating if it's the right appropriate thing to bring up, but I thought it would be important to honor a person who served on the planning commission who's recently passed away. There was an article in the Benito Link. So if you weren't aware, Elizabeth Gage died in Shoreline, Washington on February 20th, 2023. I'll just read the first few paragraphs of the report. It says she lived in Hollister for 20 years, enriching our cultural life and serving in many roles. She was a fun friend, creative, interesting, and multi-talented. Elizabeth was born in Illinois, and then her family moved to Palo Alto, where her father was a professor in the College of Education at Stanford. She graduated from Stanford with a BA in graphic arts and worked at Sunset's magazine's headquarters house with a demonstration kitchen and garden in Menlo Park. She returned to Stanford for an MBA degree, then lived in the Netherlands for 12 years as a subscription director of the Time magazine in Europe. Time Incorporated transferred her to Florida, where she met her husband, Bill Martini. They moved to Hollister in 1990s when she sought to be near her parents at Stanford to tend to their sunset years. Elizabeth and Bill bought an independent bookstore downtown and a 19th century house on South Street, as well as staffing the San Benito County Chamber of Commerce. So when I saw the name, I recognized it because it's mail that I get at my house sometimes. So
That's the house.
that's the house that I live in. Yes.
I delivered
Yeah.
the packets there.
Yeah. So
She was
that was such a great coincidence that, she was on the planning commission. I'm on the planning commission. Who would have thought? So,
And I served with Elizabeth on the
Mhm.
planning commission.
Yeah.
And she was passionate about historic preservation.
Yes, she was.
Amongst other things.
yes.
Yeah, her and Mary got along well. They were into the historic stuff.
So any other?
Thank you for bringing that up. That's very nice of you.
Yes, thank you.
So with that said, could we adjourn the meeting in her honor?
Yeah, I was going to request
Okay.
that. So if you would love to make the motion, that'd be great.
I'll move that we adjourn this meeting on behalf of Elizabeth Gage, former planning commissioner.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
I'll give it to Hugh Boyd. Okay. Roll call vote.
Commissioner Hugh
Yes.
Chair Henderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Corona,
Yes.
Vice Chair Belong,
Aye.
Commissioner Lenore.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. I almost called you, Kevin. I was this close to calling you to see if you want to go have coffee or, because we met. I like meeting with you. So I'll call you soon and we'll do that. All right, so we have regular meeting in 2 weeks.
This was the one where you had said. Yeah, we don't.